Hello, sir?
Step out of the car.
Officer, can you please tell me why I'm being stopped?
Stop being evasive. Step out.
Sir, I'm an Army officer. My ID isn't...
I don't care about that. Get out.
Will you comply or not?
Officer, I'm complying, but what am I being accused of?
Now you're resisting. Last warning.
Officer Daniel Gutierrez had been with the Windsor Police Department for 6 years when he pulled over a vehicle for a missing license plate on December 15, 2024. He was 31 years old, confident in his authority, and utterly convinced he was dealing with just another difficult suspect. The man in the SUV was Captain Jonathan Rivera, a decorated combat veteran with 12 years of service, 2 tours in Iraq, and a Pentagon security clearance. What Gutierrez did next, drawing his taser on a fully compliant Army officer in uniform, would cost him his career, his marriage, and trigger a $5.8 million federal lawsuit. The body cam footage captured everything. Gutierrez never realized the man asking calm, reasonable questions wasn't someone to dominate. He was someone you don't touch. And by the time Gutierrez deployed 50,000 volts into Rivera's back, he had already signed his own professional death warrant. He just didn't know it yet. Captain Jonathan Rivera had earned everything the hard way. 12 years of service. 2 tours in Iraq. 1 in Afghanistan. A chest full of commendations that told the story of a man who had bled for his country and lived to tell about it. At 34, he commanded respect at Fort Harrison in Virginia, managing trauma care for veterans who came home broken and needed someone who understood. His service record was immaculate. His superiors called him the kind of officer who makes the Army better. He had never been arrested, never been in trouble, never gave anyone a reason to question his character. December 15, 2024, started like any other day. Rivera finished a long shift at the base hospital, climbed into his newly purchased Chevrolet Tahoe, and headed home. The route was familiar. A 20-mile drive through Windsor, Virginia, a small town where nothing much ever happened. At 3:47 p.m., he noticed the police lights in his rearview mirror. The stop would later be documented as a missing rear license plate violation. Though Rivera had temporary tags clearly displayed in his rear window, perfectly legal under Virginia law. But legality, as Rivera was about to discover, mattered less than perception. Officer Daniel Gutierrez approached the driver's side window. His partner, Officer Jason Crosby, positioned himself at the passenger side. Before Rivera could ask what the problem was, before he could reach for his license, before any explanation was offered, Gutierrez's hand moved to his service weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, now!" The command came sharp and non-negotiable. Crosby's flashlight aimed directly into Rivera's face, despite the afternoon daylight. Both officers had their weapons drawn for what should have been a routine registration check. Rivera's hands remained on the steering wheel, exactly where they were supposed to be. His military training had taught him de-escalation, situational awareness, and the critical importance of making no sudden movements. But as he looked at the 2 officers surrounding his vehicle with drawn weapons, he understood something that no amount of training could have prepared him for. He was not being seen as a decorated Army officer. He was not being seen as an American citizen. He was being seen as a threat. Rivera's voice remained steady, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Sir, can you tell me why I'm being stopped?" It was a reasonable question, a lawful question. The kind of question any citizen had the right to ask. Gutierrez didn't answer. Instead, he yanked open the driver's door with force. "You're being evasive," Gutierrez said, his voice rising with an edge that suggested he'd already made up his mind about how this encounter would end. "You're making furtive movements." Rivera hadn't moved except to keep his hands visible on the steering wheel. The body cam footage would later show this with brutal clarity. A man sitting still, hands in plain sight, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. But in Gutierrez's narrative, which he was already constructing in real time, Rivera's calmness was somehow suspicious. His compliance was resistance. His questions were challenges to authority. "Sir, I'm an Army officer stationed at Fort Harrison," Rivera said, maintaining his composure, though his heart hammered in his chest. "I'm in uniform. My military ID is in my wallet. I'm trying to cooperate with you." Crosby moved closer, his hand still near his weapon. "You think that matters? You think you're special because you're military?" The question revealed everything. They saw the uniform not as a symbol of service to the nation they were supposedly protecting, but as an attempt at privilege. They heard Rivera's calm explanation of his rights not as lawful assertion, but as insubordination that needed to be crushed. "Exit the vehicle, or you will be removed," Gutierrez commanded, now gripping Rivera's arm through the open door. Rivera understood the calculation he had to make. He could remain in the vehicle and face forcible extraction. Or he could comply and hope that cooperation would de-escalate the situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond reason. "I'm getting out," he said clearly, speaking for the body cam that he hoped would record the truth. "I'm complying, but I need to know what I'm being accused of." That question should have been the moment when reason prevailed. Instead, it became the spark that ignited everything that followed. Rivera stepped out of the vehicle slowly, deliberately, with his hands raised where both officers could see them. He was complying with every command. He was doing everything right. But Gutierrez saw something else entirely. He saw a black man driving an expensive SUV. He saw a black man who asked too many questions. He saw a black man who spoke with confidence instead of the deference that Gutierrez apparently expected. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "Sir, for what? I haven't done anything wrong." That question became the tripwire. In Gutierrez's mind, shaped by assumptions and implicit biases he would never acknowledge in the investigations to come, Rivera's insistence on understanding the charges against him became the crime itself. "You're resisting!" Gutierrez shouted, his voice now carrying the kind of aggression that transformed a traffic stop into something far more dangerous. The body cam footage would show the objective truth. Rivera standing motionless, hands visible, making no aggressive movements whatsoever. But Gutierrez was operating in a different reality now, one where his authority had been questioned and needed to be reasserted through force. Crosby moved in from the side. Together, they grabbed Rivera and forced him against the vehicle. The position they pushed him into compressed his airways, something Rivera recognized immediately from his medical training. "I can't breathe properly," he managed to say, his voice strained. "You're hurting me." The warnings went unheeded. Gutierrez had already decided how this would end. What neither officer realized, what the subsequent investigations would emphasize with devastating precision, was that Rivera had activated the audio recording feature on his phone before the stop escalated. Every word, every command, every moment of the encounter was being captured from multiple angles. Gutierrez reached for his taser, the yellow device catching the afternoon light. Rivera saw it and felt his military composure crack for the first time. "Don't do this. Please. I'm not resisting." His plea made no difference. Gutierrez had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The taser's electrical charge hit Rivera in the back, with the force of lightning concentrated into a handheld weapon. 50,000 volts designed to incapacitate, to override the body's own nervous system, to bring down anyone regardless of size or strength. Rivera's body convulsed beyond his control. His muscles seized, turning him into a marionette with severed strings. He collapsed to the pavement, unable to control his movements, experiencing pain that seemed to travel through every nerve ending simultaneously. The electrical aftershocks continued to pulse through his system as Crosby's knee pressed into his back, adding physical restraint to a man already incapacitated by the taser's effects. Rivera's face scraped against the asphalt, the taste of blood mixed with the concrete dust in his mouth. Gutierrez proceeded to handcuff him, wrenching his arms with unnecessary force that would leave bruises for weeks. "You should have complied from the start," Gutierrez said, breathing hard, adrenaline pumping through his system. He believed his own narrative now. In his mind, he had just subdued a dangerous suspect who had threatened officer safety. Rivera lay on the ground, still experiencing the aftermath of the electrical current, and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. He had complied from the start. He had broken no laws. He had made no threatening movements. And he had been tasered for it. For 40 minutes, Rivera remained there while Gutierrez wrote his initial report. The narrative was predictable, following a script that had been used countless times before. Subject was evasive and refused lawful commands. Subject made threatening movements, necessitating less lethal force for officer safety. Every word was a lie, and every word had been captured on 3 separate cameras. The body cam footage from both officers would show the objective reality. Rivera's phone recording would capture the audio with crystal clarity. The evidence would be irrefutable, undeniable, and ultimately career-ending. But in that moment, lying on the pavement with his hands cuffed behind his back and the electrical burns throbbing on his skin, Rivera had no way of knowing that this 17-minute encounter would change the lives of everyone involved forever. Backup arrived in the form of a sergeant with 20 years of experience. He was older than both Gutierrez and Crosby, and he carried himself with the kind of seasoned professionalism that comes from seeing enough situations go wrong to know when something doesn't add up. He approached Rivera, still on the ground, and for the first time someone actually examined his credentials: the military ID, the Fort Harrison access card, the Pentagon security clearance badge. The sergeant's expression changed immediately. His eyes moved from the credentials to Rivera's uniform to the 2 officers who were standing nearby, still riding the adrenaline high of their perceived victory. He made a phone call. Within 2 hours, Captain Jonathan Rivera's name reached the desk of Lieutenant Colonel Emma Wilford, the staff judge advocate at Fort Harrison. Within 4 hours, it reached the Pentagon's office of the Secretary of Defense. Within 24 hours, it had become a crisis that would ripple through military and civilian law enforcement channels with seismic force. Because Captain Rivera wasn't just any Army officer, he was a combat veteran with multiple decorations for valor. He was the son of a retired Army colonel who had friends in every corner of the military establishment. He was engaged to the daughter of a Virginia congressman. He was the nephew of a federal appellate court judge. More importantly, he was a man who had been tasered while fully complying with police commands, and the entire encounter had been captured on multiple cameras. The next morning, 3 separate investigations opened simultaneously. The Windsor Police Department's Internal Affairs Division launched their review. The Virginia State Police opened a parallel investigation. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division assigned 2 special agents to examine every frame of footage and every word in the police reports. Officer Daniel Gutierrez went home that night and watched television with his wife. He ate dinner. He complained about dealing with difficult suspects. He had no idea that his career in law enforcement was already over, ended by 17 minutes of body cam footage that would soon become evidence in multiple investigations. The wheels of accountability, so often slow to turn, had begun to move with uncommon speed. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a file on December 16th. By the end of the week, someone had leaked the body cam footage to the media, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The video spread across social media platforms with the speed of wildfire. The hashtag #ChangeJusticeForRivera trended nationally within hours. News programs played the footage on loop, with legal experts dissecting every frame, every word, every moment where the officers had the opportunity to de-escalate and chose escalation instead. Constitutional law professors wrote op-eds for major newspapers, using the Rivera case as a textbook example of civil rights violations. Civil rights organizations rallied, holding press conferences and demanding accountability. The story had everything that made national news: a decorated veteran, racial profiling, excessive force, and video evidence that left no room for ambiguity. The Virginia Attorney General personally reviewed the footage. His statement was unequivocal. This represents a clear violation of civil rights and an egregious abuse of police power. Within 2 weeks of that December afternoon, Officer Daniel Gutierrez received his termination letter from the Windsor Police Department. The language was formal but damning. Excessive use of force, failure to follow department protocols, and conduct unbecoming an officer. But the termination was only the beginning. The Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services convened a special review board and voted unanimously to revoke Gutierrez's police certification. The revocation meant he was ineligible to work in law enforcement anywhere in Virginia. His career, built over years of service, ended because of 17 minutes of footage that showed him tasering a compliant Army officer for asking questions. Officer Jason Crosby received a 30-day suspension without pay and mandatory retraining on use of force and de-escalation. But the public scrutiny proved too much. Everywhere he went, people recognized him as the officer in the video. 3 months after the incident, he submitted his resignation, unable to handle the weight of being known for his role in what had become a national scandal. The personal consequences were severe, but they were just the beginning of a legal reckoning that would cost far more than 2 careers. Captain Rivera didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. He wanted to ensure that no other service member, no other citizen, would experience what he had experienced on that roadside in Windsor. So he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. ARFTA 1983, the statute that allows citizens to seek damages when their constitutional rights are violated by government officials. His legal team was formidable. Attorneys from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, specialists who had dedicated their careers to fighting police misconduct, and a prestigious civil rights firm that had won landmark cases against police departments across the nation. The lawsuit named Officer Daniel Gutierrez individually. It was named Officer Jason Crosby individually. It named the Windsor Police Department as an institution, and it named the town of Windsor itself, arguing that inadequate training and supervision had created the conditions that made Rivera's treatment possible. The claims were methodical and devastating: unlawful seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment, excessive force, assault and battery, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and racial profiling. The town's insurance company assigned a team of lawyers to review the case file. They watched the body cam footage. They read the police reports. They compared the officers' written accounts to what the video actually showed. They examined Rivera's credentials and service record. They calculated the potential exposure. Their assessment was immediate and unambiguous. The case was legally indefensible. A jury would see the footage. They would see a decorated Army officer in uniform, hands visible, voice calm, asking reasonable questions. They would see him get tasered for it. The optics were catastrophic. The legal liability was overwhelming. The insurance company recommended immediate settlement negotiations. The Virginia legal community, watching from the sidelines, recognized what was happening. This wasn't a case with ambiguity or competing narratives. This was a textbook civil rights violation with documentary evidence so clear that no reasonable defense could survive cross-examination. 18 months after that December afternoon, all parties sat down to negotiate the terms of one of the largest police misconduct settlements in Virginia history. The settlement agreement was signed on a quiet Tuesday morning. $5.8 million. Captain Rivera received $4.2 million in compensatory damages for physical injuries, emotional trauma, and violations of his civil rights. His attorneys received $1.6 million in legal fees. The numbers made headlines, adding Rivera's case to the record books as one of the largest police misconduct payouts in Virginia's history. But Rivera didn't stop with the money. Money couldn't erase what had happened. It couldn't remove the electrical burns or heal the psychological trauma. What it could do was fund change. Working with civil rights organizations, Rivera pushed for systemic reforms that would outlast the news cycle. The Windsor Police Department was placed under federal monitoring, with Department of Justice oversight of their use of force policies and training procedures. New policies became mandatory: comprehensive bias training for all officers, body camera requirements for every traffic stop without exception, prohibition against drawing weapons during routine traffic violations, and an independent civilian review board with subpoena power to investigate all use-of-force incidents. But Rivera wanted more than local change. He wanted state-level reform that would prevent what happened to him from happening to anyone else. The Virginia General Assembly, under pressure from constituents and facing the national spotlight on the Rivera case, passed sweeping legislation that activists successfully named the Rivera Accountability Act. The law required all police departments in Virginia to adopt the same reforms implemented in Windsor. More significantly, it created a statewide database of officer misconduct that would follow officers throughout their careers, preventing fired officers from simply moving to a new department in a different jurisdiction and starting fresh. The act represented the kind of systemic change that rarely emerges from individual cases. It was Rivera's legacy, born from 17 minutes of injustice captured on video. The reforms would affect thousands of police interactions. They would protect countless citizens. They would force accountability into a system that had too often protected its own at the expense of those it was meant to serve. Justice, in this case, came with a price tag and a mandate for change. The consequences rippled outward, touching every life involved in that December afternoon encounter. Officer Daniel Gutierrez faced no criminal charges. Prosecutors examined the case and determined they couldn't overcome qualified immunity for criminal prosecution, a legal doctrine that shields government officials from criminal liability unless they violate clearly established rights. Rivera publicly challenged this outcome, pointing out the bitter irony that the same protections meant to allow officers to do their jobs without fear had become a shield for misconduct. But the law was clear, and Gutierrez avoided a criminal record. His life, however, was fundamentally destroyed. He lost his career. His reputation was reduced to a single identifier: the officer who tasered an innocent Army captain. His marriage collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny and personal shame. Within 2 years, he filed for bankruptcy, unable to find work and drowning in debt. Jason Crosby moved out of state, eventually finding work as a security guard at a shopping mall. His law enforcement career was permanently finished. He gave no interviews and maintained no social media presence, disappearing into anonymity. Captain Rivera was promoted to major 3 years after the incident. He continued his military service, but he also became something else: an advocate for police reform and a voice for service members who face unique vulnerability in their civilian communities. He spoke at military bases about knowing your rights. He testified before Congress about the need for federal standards on police conduct. He used his platform to push for the changes that might have prevented his own encounter. But the emotional toll remained. Rivera developed post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing panic attacks during routine traffic stops even years later. The physical scars from the taser burns faded, The psychological ones did not. When asked if he regretted asking questions during that traffic stop, if he wished he had simply remained silent and compliant, Rivera's answer never wavered. "I served my country to protect constitutional rights. I wasn't going to surrender mine on a Virginia roadside because of fear." The traffic stop lasted 17 minutes. The consequences lasted the rest of their lives.